Hello, and welcome to 6 Steps to Launching Usage-Based Pricing for SaaS and AI with Revenera's General Manager and all-round software monetization expert, Nicole Flexera. Nicole, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris.
If you have any questions during the webinar, please put them in the chat. We'd love for this to be an interactive session, and we know this is a hot topic right now, so please do ask if there's anything you'd like Nicole's insight or advice on. Nicole, I know you engage with product executives all day, every day, and based on what you're hearing in the market, you've put together this practical 6-step framework that covers everything technology companies need to consider when moving to consumption-based models. So please take it away.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks everyone for joining us here today. It's my pleasure to spend some time with you. We have 30 minutes today to talk about AI monetization, which is a hot topic of the year. It has been the hot topic of last year, but it continues to be a very important thing. And we'll do exactly two things in the session today. We'll talk about what the market and what the data is telling us about what companies are doing, and then we'll talk about how you best get there. And that is based on the insights that we as Revenera have from working with hundreds and thousands of software companies out in the market. So Revenera is a company, and I'll keep this really short, focused on software monetization. We have done this for more than 30 years, but also we continue to grow and grow significantly in the field of SaaS and AI monetization. The field of licensing, entitlement management, usage and consumption has become quite the center of discussion over the last few years, and Revenera is a company that can help significantly with some of those problems and opportunities. We have more than 5,000 customers, and that's active customers today, and for them we monetize more than $50 billion of revenue that flows through our system on an annual basis. So we have some good insight into what is happening, what the trends are, and that's exactly what we want to discuss today. So really we are in the year of consumption, and those three screenshots are somewhat random, but they represent what we are seeing in the market, right? So first of all, when you look at one of them, when you look at on the left-hand side, I like Google Trends because it shows you what people search and talk about. And when you look at software consumption and software subscription, see how much that has come up over the last few years and how little was talked about just before. So it's really something that's on everybody's mind. And then, of course, we see numerous articles and discussions about it. And then also we hear, I've picked an article about Salesforce here, but all the big software companies are in the news often with their pricing models around AI and how they go about agents and how to monetize them. So that brings us to the question of what should we all be doing, and why is it so important? It's important because we all software companies, and I'm sure you all are part of teams in a software or technology company, you're all investing a lot in new capabilities with AI. You're investing in innovation and in launching more features more quickly to your customers and to keep up with the competition. But it also means that you are now being hit by a high cost bill. And that is on top of some of the cloud costs that every software company had to be facing or had been facing over the last decade or so, which means that really there's a necessity and there's an opportunity to change monetization models so that your price aligns with the value and you can innovate, but also do so in a way that doesn't impact your business negatively from a financial perspective. So let's first of all look at the data. The data that I'm sharing with you today comes out of our yearly and annual research that we do not only with our customers, but with many technology companies in the market. We usually get around 500 respondents, so it's absolutely statistically relevant. And they are all saying what I just mentioned, right? Costs erode profit margin, right? With cloud cost and AI cost, everything that's been put into innovation, the profit margins often don't look as good and as healthy as they would have a few years ago. And then everyone is planning new monetization, everyone is planning new AI capabilities, and then after that also new monetization models to offset that cost. And we looked into a little bit more detail into how are things moving, right? And what's interesting for me is that, and I've been in the field of software monetization for about 12 years, so it's been a while. And in 10 out of those 12 years, consumption always was something that was talked about and was always used in pockets or niches of the market. But it never really made it to mainstream. And that's for a lot of reasons, some of that we'll discuss later. But what we are seeing now is actually a shift in the industry that with some of the pressures that I just mentioned, the behaviors for us as software suppliers and how we monetize our software are actually changing. So what we've looked into is how are software companies monetizing their software. And we looked at, for those that said, we looked at deployment model, right? And we said basically when the software is deployed in SaaS, just going by the first line item here, then usually a year ago, most companies would have monetized it through subscription, right? And so on and so on. You see here a year ago, subscription was really prominent as a monetization model. Very often subscription is basically just the time-based models, but in many cases it would have meant a per user, per person subscription too, which is interesting because with AI, the per user cost or the per user monetization, I should say, comes under more and more pressure because agents are now doing the work that humans would have done before in some areas. So that's something that's being looked at anyways. When we look at it today, you see subscription taking a little bit of a backseat and usage coming up. And that is because of all the trends that I've highlighted. As the cost goes up and as usage patterns are different between different end customers, right? Some use a lot and have a lot of expensive transactions, and others don't use your software so much. Usage models really become the way to monetize software so that it can be fair and it can also cover the cost to the software supplier or producer. And then the other thing that we are seeing, it's the first time in a long, long time, we looked at how exactly our AI offerings being priced. And for the last decade, subscription was always on the rise. What we are seeing here is a reflection too of what you've seen in the last slides. We see where currently subscription is being used for monetization. It will be a little bit less in the future. And you see coming up from 20 to 25%, a mix of subscription and usage-based models. I call that a hybrid model, right? It basically means that my monetization or my pricing model has a base subscription and has a usage-based component on top, which seems to become more and more the favored model. Not only in what we are seeing in the data here, but also what I'm seeing in my day-to-day conversations with many technology companies at a C-level. Why those hybrid models? This is a reality that many software companies are facing today, and I talked about that a few minutes ago, so I'll keep it short. Many of you have looked at a fixed subscription revenue where customers would have paid for a certain amount of money for a certain term, right? $10 a month, $10,000 a month, a year for 3 years, but it always was basically a flat fee with maybe marginal price increases. The variable cost has come up over time and really has often reached an unacceptable level. What now is happening is that we combine, or many solution providers or software companies combine a fixed subscription revenue with variable consumption revenue. And that makes a lot of sense when you are selling software that basically gives the customer some general value, but then also you offer some high value features through agents or Gen AI that would depend on usage. So that is the model that we are seeing most, and that has a lot of benefits because it combines the predictability of subscription, which we all like so much because it brings annual recurring revenue. It's highly plannable, especially if there's multi-year subscriptions. With a consumption revenue that can lead to more growth over time. And when we look into what are currently the problems, I highlighted some of the problems that we are seeing generally in the market in the beginning of my talk track here. But also clicking one level deeper is many software companies today would say, hey, it's not easy for me to align price and value. Value being defined as the value that the end customer is getting. So why is it? It is very often because there's a problem in understanding what the customer value drivers is. So especially when I'm selling complex enterprise software, there's often an insight gap in which software suppliers don't fully understand what it is that the end customers really see value in. That might or might not be the thing in the software that they use most, but that is one thing where insights are sometimes missing. Sometimes there's a lack of data availability and insight, so that would be telemetry and understanding usage. And then there's just general uncertainty around pricing AI features, as we have just discussed. So let's talk a little bit about how do we go to usage-based models, right? And what I just highlighted to you are just some general questions in the market. And you might be sitting there now saying, hey, Nicole, well, we've got all those problems. Thanks for highlighting, but we know that already. So I put together some steps on how it can be successful to launch usage or consumption-based pricing. Because what we are seeing is that it's a big topic in every company, and often the discussion at a high level doesn't do any service to the decisions that need to be made on the operational level deep down. And if it's not fully thought through, it can backfire and it can become a point of customer frustration. While when done really well, it can become a massive driver for business growth. What always happens is that on a leadership level, companies think about consumption-based pricing and say, well, this is going to help us with gross margins, it's going to help us with growth, it's going to lower the barrier to entry. But they don't really think through what usage is, how it's defined, and then what has to happen operationally to really provide a consumption-based model that not only helps you grow your business, but also provides a customer experience that is seen as acceptable. Both of those things are really important, because if you're not going to grow your business and you're not going to improve your customer experience, then why change your monetization model anyway, right? You would only do it if you think that you get more value or your customers experience generally get more value from you. Their experience is better, and then over time they would buy more, right? If you don't think that either of that is happening, then maybe it's not the time to change a monetization model. So I've pulled together here 6 steps. I not strictly ordered, but I think a little bit by priority here. First of all, and that is a discussion that we are having with every customer or every prospect that Revenera works with that wants to go to consumption-based models. First of all, it has to be defined. What is the usage that we are going to count, and how are we going to count it? And it sounds like a very simple question. It's extremely hard to answer, and very often there's contention and misunderstandings and different definitions of what usage or consumption actually is. Right. So first of all, you've got to think about the model, right? Am I going to go to a consumption model that's prepaid or postpaid? Is it something that's included in the subscription, but just capped at a certain amount, as in, hey, you pay X for your monthly subscription and you can include, say, a 10 agent transactions, but not more. Otherwise, you have to go to a higher tier or you have to pay per consumption. Are you on that point going to tiers of consumptions where people basically move up in a good, better, and best models that include certain volumes? Or are you just really going to bill customers exactly by what they have consumed? Very, very different approach. And then how are you going to deal with customers that are going over, right? How are you dealing with overages, with grace periods? If someone reaches their consumption limit 2 days before their credits renew, are you letting them overconsume a little bit, or are you going to enforce it at the moment, potentially disrupting a business process there, right? All of those things have to be thought through. And then there's, of course, the metric. What is the consumption even that we are counting? And that could be many things. We'll get into that in just a second. And then how do we deal with the term? Does a consumption that is being paid for expire? Does it not expire? For how long can it be used? How do you implement this model when you sell through a channel, etc.? So all of these topics need to be discussed. And what I recommend for companies is to sit down and to write it up and to get executive buy-in across all executives to say, well, this is how we define usage here in our company. Because if you don't do it, I will promise you that different people have different opinions of what it is. And that often comes up late in the process, then delaying potentially a launch, right? And what can be counted is really changing, right? In the past, in the old world of software, right, we basically just looked at a device, a user, and who has access to certain features. Now, consumption can be anything. As you move on this slide from the left to the right, then you see that there's many things that you can be counting in a SaaS or AI world, and that list on the right-hand side certainly isn't complete. So what consumption means for your business is really something that you have to define, right? And you also have to think about, is it something that I can really base my pricing off? Is it going to be used in exactly the way that I think, or can there be the usage changes, etc., that basically makes the consumption unpredictable, right? That has to be thought through. The next point that I want to get to is, and I'm just having a little bit of a delay with the slides here, agree with your C-suite and board. And I just highlighted that on the last slide when I said define consumption, think about what it really is, write it down. And then let's make sure when you work on introducing a consumption-based model, that it really gets executive buy-in. It will be incredibly hard to launch a new pricing model generally, but even more with consumption, if there is no buy-in from the C-suite. And why is it? It is because people have different goals in their jobs, right? The CFO needs to make sure that the company growth and revenue is predictable. CFOs don't like models in which it's unpredictable what they're going to make in the next month or in the next year. When a CFO has to go back to the board and say, well, I don't know exactly how much this is going to bring us, it's a bad situation. The CRO or sales leader needs to retrain the sales force to really say, well, now you're selling this differently. You're going from selling boxes of software, basically, to selling different models of usage. And you need to have conversations on how this usage is going to be counted, how it's going to be refreshed, what happens if there's overuse, etc. Very different sales motion, right? So what I often see is that initially everyone gets excited about consumption-based models, but then later on, some of those questions come up. So the recommendation here is that it really gets modeled out. It's not enough to just say, we have a consumption-based model, here's how we count consumption or usage. It really needs to be modeled out in a conservative, medium, and best case model to say, well, if it is consumed this way, then we're going to make so much revenue. If it's going to be consumed more, it's going to be so much. In a best case, it's going to be so much, right? And then this needs to be tracked, and people need to hold themselves accountable for the models that they have set up, right? And then also this has an impact on annual recurring revenue. It might have an impact on churn. You need to think about revenue recognition. That's super important, especially if you have consumption models in which the consumption does not expire, which means that then the revenue would only be recognized later on consumption. And then you also need to think about smaller operational steps. Can customers just move from one type of contract to the new one, or do customers stay on the legacy contracts? All of that has to be thought through, and all of that needs to get buy-in from the C-suite and from the board, right? And I've listed a few more points here on that slide that I won't go into in detail, but that you should be thinking about as you bring forward the business case to discuss with the board. The next is, and that is maybe the most important, reading this now and talking to you all about this on this webinar, I'm thinking this maybe should have been point number one. Get customer feedback. Customer acceptance is super, super important. No one gets to launch new pricing models if the customers don't think that they make sense. And we know that from our private lives as consumers. And we've all seen it in the enterprise software world. So it's important for customers to be able to budget, right? So if it's consumption in a post-paid way, for example, what do customers do if they shoot over their planned consumption by a lot, and then all of a sudden they're being hit with a big bill, right? Or equally, even when it's prepaid, what if customers purchase too much and then they can't use it, right? There's got to be a thinking about how can customers deal with the budgets. And then fair metrics. Think about the first point of defining usage. The question that we all have to ask ourselves is that usage and how we're going to count it going to work for all customers, or for all customers that we plan this for? Or is the usage so diverse amongst the customer base that this pricing will end up being superb for one customer and not so good for the other? And then if that's the case, is there another metric that potentially would work better? And then with that predictability we talked about, and transparency is super, super important. Customers will not accept a consumption or credit-based model if they don't have the opportunity to see in real time how much they've already used. So for example, if they bought 1,000 tokens to use in a month, they will want to know how many tokens they have burned down. Potentially they want to have, or not potentially, most likely they will want to have what we call end user controls, the ability to define on the end customer side who can actually use those credits or tokens and who cannot. How can big customers, big end customers, avoid a situation in which one person or one department burns up all the credits that have been bought for the whole company, and then others sit there being left with nothing, right? All of that needs to be planned out. And if you have predictability and transparency, it's going to be more likely to be accepted by customers. You miss out on those two, customers might not like it so much. And then we always talk about a warm-up time, and I think it's kind of logical and common sense, but I think it's important to highlight it anyways. No one changes a pricing model just overnight. It always needs a warm-up time with customers where maybe in the initial phase, they would only see what they're using, but they're not yet paying, right? So that they can get used to what is being counted here before it gets really implemented. And then a transition time in which we talk about carrots and sticks, right? Make it interesting for the customers to move to that model, but then also think about how you make that model more attractive so that legacy models get abandoned. And then the technology layer, right? Number 4 here, right? Think about what technologies to use. What I often see is that there's an ask to implement something quickly, so it gets built relatively quickly with whatever system is just available, and that can create a lot of problems down the road. So while sometimes easy to quickly build something, it often doesn't scale. It often provides a difficult customer experience. It can hold you back once you change your model again. What also has to be thought about is the first point here. We always talk about consumption models and AI as if we were in an always online world, but that's just not right. Many of you have use cases in which software get used offline, right, on devices that are not permanently connected to the internet. So how are you going to deal with that? That's as important to solve as the online use case, which is often easier, right? And then, of course, making sure that the system provides everything that you want here in terms of reliability, stability, audit trails, etc., right? Because you have to be ready for the customer asking, well, I thought I used 10 credits, but now you're billing me for 20. Where is that coming from? If you don't have an answer for that, there can be disruption in the relationship. Next point. Understand the data, right? And we've talked a little bit about the data already, so I'll keep this short. So as you prepare for a consumption-based model, you will always have product managers in the companies that say, well, this is the best and coolest feature that we've just built. This is how we should monetize. People should be paying for that. but it might just not be what your customers prefer most. So it's important to look into telemetry, into usage patterns in your customers to understand seasonality. Seasonality becomes super important because consumption models can be super successful in a business model where customers have a relatively stable consumption, but then they burst over certain periods like year end, etc. And then they might be more open to pay additionally for those periods because they want to consume more rather than paying more all year long. So that should really be analyzed. And then, of course, looking at what do customers want per product and how does it all hang together, right? And then really go in and measure that way ahead of time. We always tell people to maybe start measuring consumption at least half a year before you go live. I know that's not always possible. Project timelines don't always allow for it. But where you can, that's really good because it gives you a big data layer to basically test your assumptions against reality and to make changes before it actually launches. Right, so that's just a few ideas here to make sure that you have the data, and the more data you have and the more structured you bring it together and measure it almost on a daily basis, the more successful you will be with your consumption-based models. We see the biggest failures when people just work based on assumptions and not some real data insights. Which brings me to my last point is the MVP, minimum viable product, much debated term in the industry, but you always have to start with something, and rarely will you go in and just launch everything with a big bang, right? Very often you would roll out with a small set of customers or a smaller set of products to again go back to your assumptions to see does it really work. And then move from there. Behind a consumption model, especially when implemented with Revenera, there's usually a rate table that basically breaks down the consumptions to different features and what they cost, etc., etc. That needs to be adjusted too as you prepare for your go live. And then once you're live, don't think that you ever launch a consumption-based model and keep it this way forever. It will be changing. So build in already into your project planning a cycle in which you review and iterate and refine on an ongoing basis so that it really aligns with what your customers want and with what your finance and sales teams expect. If you do that, you're likely to be very successful here. And then you're also likely to be able to get to your customers with some real good insights and hopefully grow your business. This was a really, and we kept it to 30 minutes because, everyone is busy and it's really hard to take an hour out of your day. I think the time for 1 hour webinars is over. But I hope it gave you enough of an appetite to maybe discuss more with us. We are showing here on screen some of the additional resources that are available, but also my team and I are always available to you to talk more and to answer any of the questions. I haven't seen any in the chat here. I monitored it on the side, but please feel free to reach out to us anytime. I'm happy to talk more. And with that, I hand it back over to Chris to wrap things up before we leave.
Thank you, Nicole. Fantastic presentation. It's always great to hear your insights, especially on such a hot topic. We do have a few resources available. You can access them in the event platform or head to revenera.com to download them. With that, I guess we'll say goodbye, Nicole. Thanks very much.